Can you imagine if the price of a home today was as affordable as it was when your parents bought their first home? Back in 1970, the average cost of a home was just $23,000. We can't even buy cars for that little. Today, that figure has exploded to an eye-watering $416,000. And that's not even adjusting for inflation. That's 1,800% surge in prices. And this has basically left wages completely in the dust. The average American is not making anywhere near the same standard of living as their parents or grandparents did. Why has the home ownership dream become a financial nightmare for so many people? I really wanted to know all the possible reasons for this, so I spent weeks searching for answers and reading and compiling as much information as I possibly can find regarding this topic. We're gonna explore the real truth today about the numbers that don't add up. Now that you have the bad news, what can you do to help yourself? Yes, you can actually help yourself. I'll go through all the painful detail about why we are where we are today. But at the end of this series, that's right, it's a two-parter. I'll show you what you can actually do to help yourself so that you can make tons of money for you and your family. I came from a war-torn Vietnam when I was just a child, and I have been able to build myself the American dream. Everyone can do this with a little bit of grit and consistency. Are you ready? There are numerous factors contributing to many Americans being priced out of the housing market today. Due to this, I will be splitting this topic into two videos just to make it more palatable. First, let's talk about the rising housing prices. Home prices in the United States has been rising at a pace that far exceeds the growth of the average income. This is partly due to the supply and demand imbalance. In many areas, there are shortages of affordable housing, which is driving up the price as well. This is both for home buyers and for renters themselves. The population is increasing, but our government isn't serious about tackling the affordable housing problem in this country. We were able to put a man on the moon, but we can't fix affordable housing in this country? The increase in housing prices from the 1970 to 2020 has been substantial. According to the U.S. Federal Housing Finance Agency, which tracks all the housing sales and mortgages that are backed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the average price of a home in the first quarter of 1970 was approximately $23,000. By the first quarter of 2020, that average price has hit $416,000. This figure doesn't even account for inflation. When you adjust in inflation, the increase is less dramatic, but it's still pretty significant. Another factor is income stagnation. While the cost of housing has increased, wages for the middle and lower class haven't kept up with the pace. When income growth has basically lagged behind the growth of housing prices, fewer and fewer people can afford to buy a home. This is partly due to corporate greed. We hear about corporations like Amazon, Facebook, Google making billions upon billions of dollars each and every year. Airlines are getting bailouts, and big pharmaceutical companies are charging insane prices for drugs that they sell. Yet the middle class is disappearing, and the wealthy are just getting richer and richer. Calculating the exact percentage of increase in the income from 1970 to 2020 can be complex due to various factors like inflation, median versus average income, depending on what formula you're using. And the demographics obviously change over time. However, I can provide a general overview based on just historical data. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the median income of the family household in 1970 was approximately $8,734. By 2020, the median income household has actually risen to about $68,700. These figures are not adjusted for inflation. When adjusted for inflation to 2020 dollars, the 1970 median household income is really about $58,000 equivalent. But Americans are now needing to make roughly about $120,000 just to purchase a median price home. Do you see the problem? Therefore, in real terms, the median home income has increased roughly about 18.5% over the last 50 years. That's less than 0.3% each year that people have seen their income increase. It's also important to note that this is a median figure, which means that it doesn't necessarily reflect the distribution of income gains across different socioeconomic groups. For example, income growth has been much more stable and substantial in the higher income earners than those in the middle and lower income brackets. Another reason why Americans are struggling is the increased cost of living. Other living expenses such as healthcare, education, and childcare have been consistently rising, which means that the potential homebuyer has less disposable income to save in order to save for their down payment, and they can actually afford a mortgage. How many of you out there feel like your money is leaving your bank account faster than it's going in? It seems like the second you deposit your paycheck, the money is already gone. The cost of living increases from 1970 to 2020 in the United States is again a complex figure that encompasses various factors such as housing, healthcare, education, childcare, and the daily life expenses. These are components that all increase at different rates, so you have to take all of that into consideration when you're calculating. To get a general sense of the increased cost of living, we often refer to the Consumer Price Index, or the CPI, which basically measures the average change over time in the price that we pay when we go out and we purchase items. According to the US Bureau of Labor and Statistics, the CPI in 1970 was about 38.8. By 2020, the CPI has actually risen to around 259. To calculate the percentage increase in the CPI from 1970 to 2020, subtract the starting year CPI from the ending year CPI, divide that number by the starting year CPI and multiply it by 100 so that you can get a percentage. That percentage came out to 567%. This means that according to the CPI, the cost of living has increased approximately 560% from 1970 to 2020. Remember though, this is an average across multiple categories and doesn't reflect the specific increase in certain areas like healthcare, education, and childcare, which have risen actually a lot more than even the overall CPI. For example, the cost of healthcare has actually increased significantly more than the general inflation. According to various reports, healthcare costs have actually risen hundreds of percentage points over the last few decades. So let's look at the healthcare spending per capita figures mentioned earlier. $355 per person in 1970 and $12,530 per person in 2020. Using the US Bureau of Labor Statistics CPI inflation calculator or similar types of tools, we can actually adjust the 1970 figure to the 2020 dollar to make a direct comparison. According to the BLS CPI inflation calculator, $355 in January of 1970 dollar amount was equivalent to approximately $2,500 in January of 2020. This is still a substantial increase. Now let's calculate that in a percentage increase. And we find that that result is about $10,030. Now divide that difference by the adjusted 1970 figure and multiply that by 100. And yes, I know I'm probably confusing many of you. When I started doing this video, it was a little confusing for me as well. So after making these adjustments for the inflation, the per capita healthcare spending basically increased 401.2% from 1970 to 2020. The adjusted figure provides a more accurate picture of how much more the US is spending in healthcare per person than they did 50 years ago. And this is beyond just the changes due to inflation. The same is true for education. The cost of education particularly higher education like colleges, has also skyrocketed. College Board data suggests that the average annual cost, tuition fees, college books, room and board for a 4-year private college was about $1,832 in the 1970-71 academic year. By 2020 and 2021 academic year, this cost has basically increased to $37,650. Oh my gosh, no wonder people are struggling to pay off their student loans, and it's taking their entire life. And to make matters worse, childcare is also very expensive. The cost of childcare has become a significant part of a family's budget, often exceeding the cost of housing in many states. The cost has basically risen steadily, outpacing inflation and becoming a substantial burden on so many families. And that's not all. But I don't want to make this video too long, so join me next week for the conclusion where we're going to be discussing other factors contributing to the American financial hardships, including things like low housing inventories, interest rates rising, among other reasons that are all causing these problems. At the end of that video, I'm also going to discuss with you how you can combat these stifling issues and even beat it for yourself, and how to attack it in the right way. I'm Scott, and you've been real estate half informed. Stay tuned.